The calm days in Vermont ended the moment that black Mercedes rolled onto my private road. My life turned into a battle I never could have predicted at 25. Here, on my 50 acres of land inherited from my grandfather, I always thought I'd found my perfect spot. The property was everything a recent agronomy graduate could dream of. A slice of green paradise with a 1-mile private road shared only with 3 elderly neighbors. I grew up among these trees, learning every secret my grandfather kept about this land. When he passed away in 2020, he left more than just a property. He left a legacy. But now, watching that fancy car approach, something told me that the peace of the past few years was about to shatter. What was coming would change not only my life, but that of our entire little rural community. Subscribe to the channel and hit that like button to get more stories like this. The first sign of change came with "for sale" signs popping up on neighboring lots. In a matter of months, what used to be green fields transformed into a construction site for Forest View Estates. 30 luxury mansions began sprouting up out of the ground like mushrooms after the rain, each one costing over $800,000. Barbara Thompson, the new president of the Homeowners Association, wasted no time making her presence felt. Dressed in a sharp suit and sky-high heels totally out of place for our dirt road, she looked determined to turn our little patch of countryside into a miniature Manhattan. It all started with small suggestions about how I should maintain my property. First, she sniped at my tractor parked near the fence. According to her, it ruined the panoramic view of the new mansions. Then came complaints about the natural smell of the farm, as if cows were supposed to wear perfume. The turning point was when she showed up at my gate on a Sunday afternoon, carrying a folder full of documents and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We need to discuss some necessary adjustments to keep the neighborhood up to standard," she said, as if she were doing me a favor. In her mind, my century-old farm had to conform to her idea of rural luxury. I realized that this 52-year-old woman, with her designer glasses and authoritarian stance, was much more than just an annoying neighbor. She was the harbinger of a battle I hadn't asked for but couldn't escape. My property, my family legacy, and my way of life were about to face their biggest challenge. The real showdown began when Barbara sent the first official HOA letter, printed on expensive letterhead and packed with intimidating legal jargon. The document demanded the installation of high-tech electronic gates at the entrance of my private road, citing safety concerns. The following week, I discovered a construction crew trying to put up modern light posts along the road without my permission. When I confronted the workers, they simply pointed to Barbara, who was watching it all with her arms crossed from her parked SUV. Things got worse when 2 uniformed guys started cruising around the area in a car that had Forest View Estates security emblazoned on the side. They would stop by my property regularly, claiming it was just a routine patrol. I had to explain over and over that they weren't allowed to be there. My old private property signs, installed by my grandfather, began disappearing mysteriously. Every time I put one up, it would vanish the next night. Mr. Jenkins, my 75-year-old neighbor, told me that he'd been aggressively confronted by these security guys while driving his old pickup home. The last straw came when the local police showed up at 11 p.m. on a Saturday. Apparently, someone had reported a rowdy party on my property. I was alone, going over some farm reports. The officer, who'd known my family for years, just shook his head in disapproval at yet another false alarm. The next day, I found a violation notice pinned to my barn, claiming that the century-old structure messed up the aesthetics of the neighboring development. Barbara had crossed every possible line. As I stared at that piece of paper, with the sunrise behind the barn my grandfather loved so much, I made a decision. If she wanted war, it was high time I showed this young farmer how to fight, using 21st century tools. My defense strategy started with installing a state-of-the-art surveillance system. Discrete cameras powered by solar panels were placed at strategic spots on the property. Every suspicious movement was now recorded in high definition and saved on the cloud. For an entire week, I meticulously documented every intrusion. The videos didn't lie. Security guys overstepping boundaries, attempts at unauthorized installations, and even Barbara herself tearing my signs off in the middle of the night. My digital archive grew day by day, building a rock-solid case of systematic harassment. Through a friend from college, I met Christopher, a lawyer specializing in rural law. Unlike your typical corporate lawyers, he arrived at my property in a dusty pickup truck and work boots. He spent hours going over my original documents, including the old deeds my grandfather had kept so carefully. They made several mistakes, Christopher explained, pointing to a digital map of the area on his tablet. The first was assuming they could control a property that was established decades before they even existed. The second was documenting their own threats on official letterhead. We hired a surveyor who used precise GPS to map every inch of the property. The results were surprising. 3 of the new mansions had been built so that their structures subtly encroached on my boundaries. Also, the drainage system of the development was dumping water onto a protected area, violating state environmental regulations. Christopher prepared a meticulous lawsuit. Every incident was logged with date, time, and visual evidence. We included statements from elderly neighbors, police reports on the false alarms, and even environmental impact analyses showing how the aggressive condo development was affecting the local ecosystem. The most satisfying moment was when we served the HOA with the legal notice. Barbara was in the middle of a meeting with potential buyers when the bailiff arrived. Her face flushed every shade of red as he read out our detailed list of charges and evidence. The icing on the cake was a video I'd managed to capture of a conversation between Barbara and the security guys, where she explicitly ordered them to make that young farmer's life impossible until he sells the property. The audio file was crystal clear, caught by one of my cameras during one of her unauthorized visits. While the lawsuit was pending, I stuck to my regular routine on the farm. Every attempt at intimidation was now met with a simple smile and a wave at the visible cameras. The security guys stopped showing up, the threatening letters dried up, and even Barbara started taking a longer route to avoid my road. Christopher was confident. Stay strong. They tried using money and intimidation to get what they wanted. Now we're going to show that justice doesn't cave in to corporate bullying tactics. The technology they assumed I wouldn't know how to use was about to become their worst enemy. The preliminary hearing was set for a rainy Wednesday. I walked into the county court in the only suit I owned, the one I'd kept since graduation. Barbara and her legal team took up half the room in their expensive suits and state-of-the-art laptops. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Christopher began by presenting our digital documentation. On a big screen, he showed a 3D map of the property, highlighting every documented intrusion. The HOA lawyers' expressions visibly changed as they saw the accuracy of our evidence. The judge, a middle-aged man with a noticeable rural accent, watched every video, every record intently. When we got to the footage of Barbara vandalizing the signs, she squirmed uncomfortably in her seat. The turning point came when the audio of her incriminating conversation with the security guys played. During a break, I got an unexpected message. William, one of the younger residents of the development, wanted to talk. Unlike the others, he showed an understanding of how important it was to preserve the rural character of the area. He admitted that several property owners were unhappy with Barbara's aggressive tactics. When the session resumed, the HOA legal team asked for a pause to discuss a settlement. Christopher and I met with them in a side room. Their initial proposal was ridiculous. They wanted me to accept a token sum and some moderate restrictions. I immediately turned them down. After 3 hours of negotiation, we reached a final agreement. The HOA agreed to pay $75,000 in moral damages and cover all legal fees. All structures encroaching on my property would be removed within 30 days. Barbara would be ousted as president, and a formal non-interference agreement would be notarized. The final document included a special clause. Any future violation would automatically incur a $10,000 fine per incident. Christopher grinned as he added that part. It was our guarantee that the story wouldn't repeat itself. Barbara signed the documents without even looking me in the eye. Her hand trembled ever so slightly, smudging the ink on the paper. In that moment, I didn't feel triumph over her defeat, just relief that I could finally go back to the life I chose. I walked out of the courthouse under a light drizzle, thinking of my grandfather. He always said that land wasn't just a patch of dirt to build houses on. It was a living heritage we had to protect. Now I fully understood what he meant. On my way home, I stopped by the little town cafe. Mr. Jenkins was there with other elderly neighbors, eager to know the outcome. When I shared the news, I saw tears in the eyes of those who had dedicated their lives to this land. One of them raised his coffee cup in a silent toast. We didn't need words to express what that victory meant to our community. That night, sitting on the porch my grandfather built, I watched the lights of the mansions twinkle in the distance. They could shine as much as they wanted now, but they wouldn't overshadow our way of life anymore. Modernity and tradition would have to learn to coexist, each respecting its own space. 6 months after the court settlement, the local dynamic had changed noticeably. William, the resident who'd supported me during the case, took over as HOA president. His first move was to create a community integration committee that included both longtime residents and newbies. The development's drainage system was completely revamped, now following sustainable practices. I found out that several of the new residents genuinely cared about organic farming. Sarah, a well-known chef who moved into one of the mansions, proposed a partnership to supply fresh produce to her restaurant in town. I even started offering educational tours on my property on weekends. The kids from the development, used to screens and video games, were amazed to learn about planting and harvesting. Their stressed-out executive parents found unexpected peace in getting in touch with the land. My century-old barn, once considered an eyesore by Barbara, became the meeting point for monthly community events. We organized local produce fairs, gardening workshops, and even a harvest festival that drew visitors from across the county. Mr. Jenkins, with decades of experience, became an informal consultant for residents wanting to create their own gardens. His old pickup now parked freely around the neighborhood, always loaded with seedlings and priceless advice. The private road even got an elegant middle-ground solution. We installed a discreet security system that respected the rural aesthetic, with cameras camouflaged in rustic wooden posts and low-impact solar lighting. The project, developed together, proved that modernity and tradition could coexist harmoniously. Barbara quietly moved out a few weeks after the settlement. I later heard she sold her house to a couple of nature photographers who immediately started documenting the local wildlife. Their pictures soon adorned the walls of the newly built community center. On one particularly meaningful afternoon, I found an old box in the attic. Inside was my grandfather's journal, detailed notes about every season, every crop, every shift in the land over the decades. I scanned all the material and started a blog, sharing his wisdom with the new generation of rural enthusiasts. The most surprising part was realizing how technology, which at first seemed like a threat to our way of life, became an ally in preserving our history. The cameras that defended me from the intimidation now captured the growth of the crops and helped with environmental monitoring. Yesterday, at sunset, I parked my tractor at the very spot where it all started. I watched the mansions light up slowly in the twilight. Among them, small gardens began to emerge. Living fences replaced concrete walls, and solar panels reflected the last rays of the day. I realized that my grandfather was right about another thing. The true legacy isn't just in the land, but in the wisdom of living in harmony with it. Our little Vermont community had found its unique balance, proving that progress doesn't mean abandoning your roots, but strengthening them with new nutrients. Subscribe to the channel and hit that like button to get more stories like this. 1 year after the court settlement, our community was chosen for a documentary on sustainable development. The film crew spent a week capturing our unique experience of blending the modern with the traditional. What caught their attention most was how we turned what could have been a destructive conflict into a model of cooperation. William's project to integrate solar energy into the old properties even won a State Innovation Award for environmental sustainability. Using my farm as a pilot project, we developed a system that preserved the historical look of the buildings while maximizing energy efficiency. The barn now produced more energy than it consumed. Sarah, the chef, expanded our initial partnership into a broader program. Her From the Farm to the Table initiative connected local restaurants with small regional producers. The success was so overwhelming that I had to hire 2 young locals to help with the growing demand. They were both children of condominium executives who discovered their passion for farming thanks to our educational tours. The blog featuring my grandfather's journals gained followers from all over the country. Young and experienced farmers alike commented on how his careful observations of natural cycles were still relevant, even decades later. A local university even proposed digitizing and studying his climate records, which turned out to be invaluable for research on climate change. In an ironic twist, I received an email from Barbara. She was living in Arizona now, and had started an urban gardening project in Phoenix. Her message was brief but sincere, admitting that our dispute had made her rethink her relationship with the land and community. I replied, wishing her the best, closing that chapter in peace. Mr. Jenkins, at 76, turned into an unlikely local celebrity. His weekly rural wisdom program at the community center had a waiting list. Watching that shy man teaching tech execs how to tell the right time to plant based on nature's signs was one of my greatest joys. But the deepest transformation was in people's mindset. The invisible barriers that once separated old residents from new ones were long gone. In their place emerged a community united by common values of sustainability and respect for the land. The conflict that almost cost me the farm ended up creating something much bigger than just property or territory. We crafted a living model showing that tradition and progress can not only coexist, but also strengthen each other. Subscribe to the channel and hit that like button to get more stories like this.